you?
Oh, hi, Mark.
I think the last time that I saw you was at the Dabs Mila pop-up opening.
Absolutely. And listeners, I'm sure you already know what a beautiful man is hosting this show, but I will never forget the act of kindness that you did for me. Do you remember what you did?
I don't remember what I did. Tell me.
So Davs Mila are mutual friends who are an Australian couple, a married couple who are the dream couple, right, Mark?
They are, for sure.
It's unreal.
Absolutely.
Were you at the talk that they gave at Beyond the Streets?
I was not at the talks, no.
At that talk, it was revealed that their symbiotic and loving artistic as well as amorous relationship resulted, or I suppose led to them, depending on which way you look at it, having not spent more than one night apart in 20 years, I think it is. They spent one night apart in 2009.
Something like that.
They had a great show. You and I were there. I don't know when that was. It seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
At that show, they released little pins of their characters, and I arrived to the show a bit late, fashionably late, as they say, although that would depend on your perspective. But there were these cute little pins, and I was vying for one, and I was late, and you got me one, and you gave me one.
I did. Nice.
You did.
Good job, Mark.
I didn't ask for it. You didn't. You just went out into the wild of the gallery, came back.
Nice. What are you drinking there? Is that your morning coffee? Are you just starting your day right now?
Yeah, kind of. Sort of. Not really. No, that's an exaggeration. I suppose that's a bit of an overstatement. It is an espresso. My father was kind enough to get me an espresso machine to replace my espresso machine that broke. He got me one for the Christmas and birthday.
Nice.
It was nice, which was last year. But I'm usually up till, somewhere between 2 and 4.
Okay.
And then I wake up and I stretch and I meditate and then I work out.
Okay.
And then I talk to Mark.
How's it been for you? I read somewhere that you said that the quarantine has fried your brain.
It's been really okay for me. I've said this before and I truly mean it. I am very, very confronted with how lucky I am. And I'm just really grateful to be able to be in the position that I'm in this circumstance, to be able to be focused on a radio show and meeting with you, and that being my concern for the day, that I'm able to sustain myself and feed myself and work out. And I deal well with quiescence, which I haven't really experienced in my life.
Yeah.
As an adult. So that having no responsibilities or very limited responsibilities is really freeing for me, and I'm really basking in that luxury. So I've been okay. I found, as you heard, my brain glitches. I forget words. Mm-hmm. I forget people's names. It's really
Me too.
It's Mark, is this because we're old, or it feels that it has been exacerbated? But I have been dealing with it quite well. I've been enjoying it. I've been reading a ton, a little work here and there. I kind of learned to cook, a lot of ordering.
But you do have a new album coming out. AFI has their 11th studio album coming out June 11th. It's called Bodies.
Yeah.
Did you record this in quarantine, or was this kind of something that you had before?
We had written and recorded that record to be toured on and released in 2020.
Right.
And the plan was, again, my concept of time is blurred, but I think initially we were to be touring in the fall. Actually, at first it was spring. It was supposed to come out in spring in 2020. Then it got pushed to fall maybe it was pandemic. Anyway, it was supposed to come out last year, and we were supposed to tour it last year. And so we went through the same deliberations and considerations that many artists did who had music ready to go, and finally decided that now was the time to release it. Do you have music that you have released or you're sitting on, or what?
We have the better part of an album that we've been sitting on and working on piece by piece during quarantine.
Still working on
it. We'll write a song, work on it for a while, send it around. Mm-hmm. And I think, once we can get in a room together, I think in 2 weeks we could have a record good to go.
Wow. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Jade and I released the Black Audio record, our 5th Black Audio record in the middle of quarantine that we weren't planning on releasing, which was fun for us. It was really satisfying for me because a lot of songs that I weren't expecting to be available to the public became available to the public. And it was really interesting, Mark. We had relatively recently toured on the last Black Audio record, and more people heard this record than the one prior, than the one that we toured on.
Right. What are you excited about with his new record, Bodies?
At this moment, it's pretty definitively, well, it's definitively, I suppose. There's not pretty definitively. It's definitively my favorite AFI record. So that's very exciting for me. It's been quite some time since a full-length record has been released by AFI where I really, really love each one of the songs. As time has gone on in a band, I imagine you've dealt with this artistically, where in the beginning of creation, you just love everything you put out. But then, at least for us, through, differing opinions within the band and us working as a democracy, a lot of times there'll be moments on the record that I would have preferred a different track or a different moment. And This isn't the case with this one for me. Conversely, I know that there are some tracks on here that I love that certain band members do not love. So I guess I get this one.
It's nice to get one every now and then. Can you tell us about the Bodies experience that goes along with the album?
Yeah, so we created this little virtual world that provides an art gallery for people who are interested in perusing the world that we created. And the art gallery is filled with art that is submitted by fans. So we solicited the fans saying that we were going to be doing something, and we asked them to submit AFI inspired art, specifically art inspired by the few songs that are off of Bodies. And we received all these wonderful submissions, and they are on display. They're in rotation. I do believe that if people would still like to participate in this, they can create art that's inspired by the Bodies songs that are released, and it will still have an opportunity to be rotated within the gallery. And so you can go to this experience. I don't know how, Mark, do you know?
The internet?
So the internet has it, and you can get in on the internet and navigate your way first through the World Wide Web to this Bodies experience, and then immerse yourself in this virtual world that will allow you to go and see this art. And there are other little bonuses that can be found and clicked upon throughout the Bodies experience.
Talking about goth music.
Define it.
How would you define goth? How I defined goth was, for me, goth is like sad music, but it's also very theatrical. And it's like, you dress like you're going to a funeral, and you think that nobody in the world understands you, which is not far from being a punk rocker to me. Like, you're a punk rocker and you're like, well, nobody understands me and I'm kind of an outcast from society. But I feel like goth has an aesthetic that's really cool and very specific to that scene. My entrance into that whole world was The Cure. So Robert Smith is kind of like Robert Smith is my touchstone for that whole scene.
For me, I think you said something that's very poignant and very important as far as the public perception of that term, it being one of many terms I'm pretty sure that journalists created for a genre of music that they had a difficult time describing. Though I believe the Wolfchild, Ian Astbury, takes credit for the term, having applied it to the kids who hung out with Andy Sexgang at the Visigoth Hotel, or the Visigoth apartments that Andy lived in England at the time when that scene was emerging. But it is punk. It's post-punk, generally. Well, now it's hard to say, because I think now when people use that term, it doesn't really refer to a culture or an art, but more of the current agreed aesthetic, which doesn't entirely relate to the aesthetic that you were envisioning, I believe, when you were describing the music. Regardless, if we're working under the understanding of that being goth and we're starting with The Cure, when did I get into it? Was that the question? What was the question?
Well, how did you get into it? Or do you ever think that you went through a goth phase?
The word is tough, but I suppose if we're going to communicate here, I suppose I went through a goth phase, perhaps never got out of a goth phase. No phases, really. But like you, I believe the first truly post-punk band that I got into was The Cure. I had heard In Between Days when I was young, and I had seen the video, and then the first Cure record that I got was Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me.
Same.
Oh, you too. I guess we're the same age, right?
I'm 49.
Oh, you're a little older than me, but you don't look it.
Thank you, sir.
But prior to hearing that music, the aesthetic really appealed to me. growing up, all the mall punks, the ones that I found most fascinating and most captivating were those who leaned toward that darker Roz Williams, Susie Sue beauty. And, you know, the goth boxes, the mesh and lace, if you will, and the clove smoke and the bangs and the harsh eyeliner and the cheekbone highlights. I was enamored of it all. So I started to dive deeper into the culture, which when we were young was really edging against pop culture, of course, because with the British invasion, you know, there was a lot of that was, you know, getting played on MTV. Susie was on MTV and Robert was on MTV, and then Depeche Mode, who have those darker elements to their synth music, which I think drove Vince Clarke away to do Erasure, which I also love, legend tells. But it's the music that has really lasted with me, the post-punk music, my entire life. As you know, as you asked right before we go on, I was just listening in Japan a little bit. So one of my favorite artists, Coil, finally, their music is so difficult to come by, and they have a vast catalog of strange releases. And one of my favorite records, period, is their record, Music to Play in the Dark. And since technology has happened and I no longer have ways to listen to music, I haven't been able to listen to that record properly in many, many years. And it finally just made it on to the internet. Just really spoke to me. It really cued into my senses of isolation, but represented the beautiful side of that isolation and the recognition of the beauty that is in the darkness and the dichotomy that is life, and you know, the obsession with death for various reasons, whether you're looking at the campier theatrical side like death rock and American death rock, and then of course British death rock. I mean, Specimen is one of my favorite bands.
By the way, Gus has been talking about Specimen this whole show.
What? You guys have been talking Batcave before I got here?
We did. Gus, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Gus, did you see Specimen?
Still can't hear Gus.
Gus is probably saying, yeah, I saw them with Alien Sex Fiend in Santa Monica, or it was Orange County, I think, is where they played that, like, Release the Bats.
What was the music that was being played in your house when you were growing up?
By me or by my family?
By your parents. Like, what were you exposed to in your youth?
My dad loved the Beatles, and honestly, I never went deep into the Beatles. I'm the only person who is a professional musician who never went deep into the Beatles. I know most of the hits, I suppose, but by way of the cartoon, I understand it. Of course, I respect it and appreciate it. And when I hear it, I like it. But I never went deep. But when I was very, very young, my mother used to listen to Diana Ross, the Jackson 5, and she had a record collection. I've spoken of this many times, so it's probably very boring for someone who's listening to me purposely again, but she had a record collection, and I found the Rocky Horror Picture Show soundtrack on vinyl when I was a kid, and I would stare at it, and I would listen to it, and I didn't know what I was listening to, but I think that's a very telltale point in the trajectory of who I am. I love musical theater. My mom put me in musical theater when I was maybe 10. I was in Oliver Twist, and I did that. Yeah, I was in Oliver Twist, but I was just one of Fagan's boys. And that taught me that experience. It was in Sacramento, California, the cultural epicenter of California. And it was a city children's production of Oliver Twist. And I auditioned. I did not get Oliver or the Artful Dodger. I was one of Fagan's boys, but I do vividly remember by the time showtime came, I was terribly ill with a high fever, but I still performed, and that's when I learned show must go on.
That's awesome.
The amount of times you and I have continued to do that, I'm sure.
Oh,
are countless.
Totally. How many times have you been on tour, sick as hell, and your tour manager's like, well, do you want me to tell these thousands of people to go home, or do you want to go on stage and sweat it out?
And embarrass yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, Mark, it's the worst feeling, but you have to do it. So that's what was playing in my house. But my parents were very, they enjoyed music and they loved music. So I was given a cassette player, a single speaker boombox in the very early 80s, right when boomboxes came out, somewhere around that time. And they allowed me to get 3 cassettes. So the cassettes that I chose at Tower Records, which was likely the first Tower Records because I was in Sacramento, were Duran Duran, Devo, and Men at Work.
Nice selection.
It got worse after that, but yeah, it was a pretty good start.
Those are 3 great ones to start off with. We asked you to pick 5 songs that are important to you, the first of which is Jane's Addiction's Stop from Ritual de lo Habitual. Amazing song.
It's interesting. So the way that the question was delivered to me was pick 5 hits, quote unquote, from the last 30 years. So I just did it stream of conscious, but first I had to take pause because I had to do the math. And 30 years ago was not the 80s. It was the 90s.
Holy sh!
Yeah.
That just hit me right this second.
30 years ago was 1991.
Wow.
So that excluded a lot of music. And so I had to take pause and think, okay, what were some hits? And I know you were using the term hits loosely or whoever written, but I went for songs that were played on the radio or MTV from the 90s. And the first thing that came to mind was Mountain Song when thinking of Jane's Addiction. And then I realized, hang on, I think that was the 80s. And it was.
Yeah, it was.
Then I was thinking of My Bloody Valentine, and I'm not too sure how much play that got off of Alt Nation, but it did. And so did Jane's Addiction Stop, which I'd been a Jane's Addiction fan from Nothing Shocking era, from Mountain Song. I had seen Mountain Song video on some sort of video cassette compilation. I have no idea what this was, but that was the first I'd ever heard or seen Jane's Addiction. It was the Mountain Song video. Also on whatever this was some strange Butthole Surfers performance art where I think they were cooking human flesh, and I think Gibby Haynes on the grill onto the grill. He wasn't sitting on the grill.
Right.
Yeah, so I was turned on to both of those artists. I remember Dave and Perry, whose names I didn't know, suddenly making out in the video, and it blew my mind. I didn't even know what to think, other than okay, this is important. this is something. And that riff, which later in life, like I'm not even talking about Stop yet, but later in life, I realized is so similar to Nausea by X, the Mountain Song riff.
Oh, okay.
And then it's close. Regardless, Jane's Addiction has had such a huge influence on me, and Perry was such an important frontman and is, and his voice and his aesthetic and his figurative voice and his lyrics. It was such a zeitgeist, really. And I wasn't in Los Angeles. I was in Northern California. But even not being there, just hearing that music and seeing those videos, you could sense that they were representing a new culture. And then, of course, spread that new culture by way of Lollapalooza. Lollapalooza, on the Ritual de Habitual tour, their swan songs, was the first and only festival I attended as a fan.
Okay.
Until I was very late to Coachella. I started going to Coachella maybe 10 years ago.
Where did you see the Lollapalooza show?
Mountain View.
I was there. You and I were at the same show at the same time. Yes, I was there.
Out. And Susie.
At the Shoreline Amphitheater. Totally, yeah.
It was Rollins, which me praying to hear Black Flag. Of course not, because I was that kid. Butthole Surfers, which admittedly I was disappointed. They seemed very off their heads, as the British say.
Right.
Then Trent, Nine Inch Nails. It was the first time I'd seen Nine Inch Nails, and I'd only heard Pretty Hate Machine on cassette. And I was like more into Skinny Puppy. So I was like, Skinny Puppy, but not. And then I saw it. Do you remember him bleeding all over the guitar?
I don't remember that, no.
Do you remember where you were sitting?
I was in the grass.
Oh, okay. So my father, my same father, the man that he is, the type of guy that he is, I was dying to go to this show, okay? And I was a kid. I couldn't drive. It was me and the original members of AFI minus Adam Carson and our friend Alexa. And we drove up to Mountain View. and we had 7th row seats.
Wow.
I mean, the whole experience was so impactful for me. AFI, I think, had just started, and I remember vividly the rose smoke. I think Susie had rose scented smoke billowing off the
Okay.
There were drag queens behind me with glitter globe, almost disco ball, large, garish earrings who were just melting and screaming over Susie Sue. And there was a hot, quote unquote, goth girl behind me.
Nice.
I couldn't believe it. I had never seen such a thing in the wild because I was from the middle of nowhere, and there were alt girls, and the quote unquote goth girls were older and gone because at this point, we were reaching the end. We were already in the 90s, but the whole experience was very, as I said, impactful and influential. And Trent came out, and Trent had a white guitar, and at that time, he was very into destroying physically, and it was when he would attack the keyboardist, which I think I saw him do multiple times years later. But as a puerile youth, I was watching that, and immediately when he came out and started getting it, I realized, oh, okay, this guy's getting it. This guy is the real deal. And he eventually does something that results in him, I think when he was attacking the keyboardist, who would the keyboardist have been at the time? I
don't know.
Mark? God, it might have been Chris Renna, right? Yeah, it was probably Chris. So he's like attacking Chris and throwing the kid.
Gus is nodding. We can't hear Gus, but he's nodding.
Gus, you can hear me now,
there
right?
He is.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Hey, Gus.
Yeah, it was probably Chris Renna on that tour, if my memory doesn't fail me.
Probably Chris. So he was attacking Chris's gear, and he kept throwing the keyboard down, and Chris kept having to set it back up. I presume this was theater. I presume that Chris knew this would happen every night. But amidst the attack, Trent cut himself up, and he was playing a white guitar, and he was bleeding all over the white guitar. And it was gorgeous. And as however old I was, 14, 15-year-old kid, it really left an indelible impression on me. And forever on, I was a big Nine Inch Nails fan. And then Nine Inch Nails got better and better and better. So, stop. There's Jane's Addiction. They played that at that show. Ritual of Daily Habitual is absolutely one of my favorite records. Touring South America on Lollapalooza, AFI was. Jane's Addiction was on the tour, and we were sharing that day. And Perry invited me on stage to sing Stop.
Wow.
It was one of those very surreal moments where I was completely self-aware on stage singing with him. I'm kind of tearing up talking about it, and looking out into the crowd and looking at Perry and singing Stop with Perry and looking out in the crowd. I could picture my 15-year-old self watching it.
That's so rad. Choice is Suede's Animal Nitrate.
Woo! God, that's fun. That's a good choice. I never got to see Suede, unfortunately. So I thank generally, with the exception of a few, with the exception of the Smiths and Morrissey and the first wave, but I have Aaron Axelson to thank for my knowledge of Britpop. Do you remember who this was, Mark? Certainly you've met him over the years, but not being from San Francisco, you might not remember him. He was the music director of Live 105.
I'm sure that I've met him.
Yeah. And Aaron had a club in San Francisco in the 90s called Pop Scene, named after, of course, Pulp. And in this club, Aaron was really directly responsible for bringing Britpop to the United States. He was the first to play bands like Suede, like Pulp, like Blur, Radiohead. Muse, the first time Muse played when they still sounded like Radiohead, played this 300 capacity club. And he would have this dance night. And there was just this whole San Francisco scene of kids who would go out every week and pack the place and dance to Disco 2000 and dance to Animal Nitrate. And it was really such a great time. And it was such a vibrant world. And he would play shoegaze, and he would play Ride, and he would play Slow Dive. And he worked at a store called Maud Lang in Berkeley. and they would sell Jam records and Spearmint records and Supergrass. And Suede was someone that of that scene that really impacted me. I love the lyrics to that song. I love their rich Bowie leanings. Really spoke to me, of course, being that Bowie is the progenitor, Bowie and Eno, of really goth music, if we're going to use the word. If you go back to...
Did you and Gus talk before the show? Because Gus was talking about how Bowie is like the beginning of goth music.
Just is.
We should have.
Yeah, we could have and should have. Yeah, I mean, the beginnings of it all, as far as I can tell, I wasn't there, but Gus can attest to it. From what I can tell, Brian Eno, the Velvet Underground, and David Bowie started it all. Roxy Music, the glitter, the dark side of glitter before punk happened, and then punk stopped and quote unquote goth happened. Goth and new wave started and neuro. But the Suede's version of that, of the glamour and the trash and the poeticized kinky sex in the council homes that is illustrated in the big British hit with the great hooks, with the great Bowie hooks, it really spoke to me. And Suede, and then when you look at Brett Butler, he was beautiful. He was gorgeous. And that androgyny of the 90s was, again, very impactful and spoke to those artists that came before them doing that, whether it be Bolan or Bowie or Robert or Roz. So I picked that song because that was part of 30 years ago that I really enjoyed. 30 years ago, which when we were kids, 30 years before that was the 60s.
It's crazy.
So I'll be leaving soon.
Sour times.
Oh, yeah. So again, thanks again to Aaron Axelson. Most of the cool music of the 90s, which I didn't find a lot of cool music in the 90s played on the radio. But because of that club and because of Aaron Axelson, when I was crossing the bridge to go to shows or to go to clubs when I was in my 20s, my early 20s or late teens, one of the artists that stood out coming through my damaged cassette player, where the cassette player was broken. I only had one speaker that worked to the left, and then I had a toothpick shoved into this button to keep it depressed in order to keep it on FM. And Sour Times, her gorgeous voice singing Nobody Loves Me, It's True, which extracted from that is kind of trite. I mean, if you read Nobody Loves Me, It's True, it's like, okay, yeah, we've heard that before, but she meant it not like you do. And I had heard trip hop before a little bit, but that's only, they're on my list, Sneaker Pimps. So, I mean, they were right next to each other, but that sound was brand new, and it was so ethereal and cool and moving and unique. And again, very much a part of that time. Obviously, you could hear the drugs in the Sneaker Pimps. You could just hear the drugs of the 90s in the Sneaker Pimps. And that actually takes me back to that time too, because those drugs are really prevalent at the clubs, and the people who didn't survive them, it's very sad. And the artists who didn't survive them. But Portishead, wow, they are gorgeous. I wish we could get more music from them. Their third record, are you a fan, Mark?
I'm a fan of songs. I've never owned an album.
Oh, you got to do it.
Okay.
In my opinion, they're the best of what that genre is generally considered. Beautiful. There's hooks all over it.
Okay.
The mood is just so lush and dreamy. Yeah, you must listen to that. Pimps. That Becoming X record that came out, I think, a little bit prior to Dummy is great. It's just so sultry, and the lyric in Six Underground. Were you familiar with that song, Mark?
I'd have to listen to it. I don't recognize the name off the top of my head.
It goes, take me down, Six Underground. Well, she sings, don't think because I understand, I care. Don't think because I'm talking, we're friends. Oh, and it's just, it's just such a beautiful femme fatale. And again, really representative of what was of the detachment and disassociation that was happening in that world and in youth culture at that time and in music culture. And the tone of that music and the creation, the strange amalgamation of electronica and scratching and blues and jazz. It was really beautiful. But that lyric and her voice and this moving on to the Sneaker Pimps really spoke to me as well. And then, do you want to say it or should we go on to the
You go. No, I love it.
So then the third, to speak of trip hop, Massive Attack, that record, people really point to Blue Lions as well. That wasn't as much for me. The influences on Blue Lions didn't speak to me as much as the new sound that I was hearing on Mezzanine. And, Teardrop, yeah, Mark?
Yes.
I feel like television shows, as I understand it, there was some sort of resurgence of that song, I believe, because it got licensed somewhere where it got played a lot. But that's another song. So that's strangely more so than Portishead, I suppose, because it doesn't have that rolling, churning dance beat that Massive Attack has in that song, and Inertia and other songs on that record. But that song would cross over to the goth clubs. And I think it was most likely there that I heard Massive Attack for the first time. And thinking about it now, it's Lizzie Frazier who sings on Teardrop, which, Mark, do you know Elizabeth Frazier?
I don't.
Elizabeth Frazier was the fey, gorgeous, diaphanous voiced young woman who fronted Cocteau Twins.
Oh, okay. Rad.
Yeah. So Cocteau, which had a very strong presence in the quote unquote goth scene by way of their. So have you ever listened to early Cocteau, Mark?
I don't know which era of Cocteau Twins I had.
You probably knew the 90s because they were very, very big with Las Vegas, which front to back is
totally
flawless record. I would argue the same in a different way, in a different genre of their record Garlands, which I believe is their first record. Yeah. And early on, they leaned a little bit more Joy Division and a little bit darker, grittier post-punk than the more ethereal, shoegazy dream pop that most people know them for. But her voice is gorgeous, and she lent her voice to this timeless track, Teardrop. I just remember swirling around to it in the clubs, and you still hear it to this day in the clubs. Well, not this day, because there are no clubs, but the day that happened before we were locked in for a year and a half, rightfully so, one would still hear Massive Attack at the clubs, and definitely Elizabeth Frazier.
You is so rad and so inspirational. Like, I don't know, you're just a really awesome person to talk to and hang out with. Every time I encounter you, I get the same feeling as when I walk into a really great bookstore or a really great art supply store or something like that, where I'm like I talk to you and I want to go like learn how to paint and write better songs. And
me too. Let's do it together. I need some work, Mark.
Totally.
Really, such a huge compliment. Thank you. I don't think I deserve it, but I wow, thanks, man. I really appreciate that.
How much do you miss Jerry Finn? Because I miss the fuck out of him.
I think about him so often. I miss him so much. He was so wonderful. He was one of really the last generations of passionate, genuine music people that we know, and we were both honored by his participation in our creation. And he was lovely. I had such great times with him, and I would torture him. He didn't like to be touched, remember?
Oh, totally. He hated it.
Posthumously,
hated it.
He can't yell at me for that, but so I would sit on his lap and he would squirm. There was one time he got mad and he threw something at me for sitting on his lap. It was all playful, but I was wearing these Saint Laurent white denim pants.
Probably cost $5,000.
He threw coffee on them.
Oh no!
Then I became upset, and he felt so bad because it was just a reflex reaction on his part. It was impulsive. Right. And Jerry Finn, mensch that he is, replaced the Saint Laurent pants.
Wow. He's that kind of guy.
He was that kind of guy.
When our son was born, everybody else was giving us like cool, like, I don't know, baby gifts and baby clothes. And he bought our infant son a leather jacket with punk rock pins on it.
That's the kind of guy he is. I wish it would have been pleather, but One time, someone made me a chocolate cake for my birthday while we were in the studio at Conway. You might have actually... We were in Conway together at some point, you and I, right?
I think so, yeah.
You might have been nearby. Did you ever see the chocolate cake in the common area?
I did not. I don't remember. I may have seen it. I don't remember.
Paris saw it. She ate it, and she threw it up in the bathroom and clogged the toilets.
Incredible.
The longer story. I don't know if you could tell it by my tone, but I still haven't gotten over it. Anyways, Jerry loved the cake. He's like, I'm not going to eat that. It's vegan. And listeners, of course, this was 400 years ago when delicious vegan treats weren't universally available. So it was quite a labor of love to create a vegan cake, ironically. And it was delicious. And Jerry Finn even admitted it was one of the best cakes he'd ever had. And no cows were harmed in the creation of that. But yes, he was a very thoughtful and artistic man, and I miss him, Mark. I think about him. It's just so sad that, we can't just say hello.
Yeah.
But we left.
He told me a story one time. He was saying that he was recording an AFI record with you guys, and he hadn't seen you in a few days. Like, you had just not been in the studio, and people have been trying to call you and see, like, were you sick or were you busy with something or what was happening? And he found out, this is before MySpace, is before, obviously well before Instagram or any like social media things like that. But he found out through friends that what you were doing was going to Magic Mountain and riding roller coasters by yourself. Is that true?
Well, no, I've never been to Magic Mountain alone, but I was probably at Magic Mountain. And in my defense, that trip was probably instigated and chaperoned by our A&R guy.
Oh, right.
Luke Wood, who we were I was just with Luke Wood, and he was reminiscing about that experience of us going to Magic Mountain together.
I just thought that was awesome that, you're obviously, the singer goes in and sings and there's a lot of guitar tracking and overdubs.
Yeah.
Jerry Finn took a day and a half to get a guitar sound, and it used to drive Travis just insane. Travis wouldn't show up either until it was time for him to do it. But I just thought it was awesome that he was like, oh no, everything's cool. He's just off riding roller coasters.
I wasn't lost on a drug binge or a wild libidinous day of orgies. I was on X2.
Did you ever get so into The Cure that you started listening to The Glove? Did you ever get into The Glove?
It's interesting that you bring up The Glove because, of course, I like The Glove, but that is an album that missed me. I loved Susie, I loved The Cure, and I love The Creatures, but I never owned the Glove record. So my only exposure to the Glove record were T-shirts and the singles that I would hear about the club, which I think traditionally I would confuse with some Cure track, because as you know, it was difficult to acquire music as we were growing up, so we didn't have knowledge of the entire catalog. Robert Smith once, this new song they played live once when I was much younger, and he was like, that's Shake Dog Shake, it's on Japanese whiskey. And I'm like, that was an import. I'm like, I never got that. Never forget it, Mark.
I have a more embarrassing Robert Smith story.
No.
When we played the Cure Icon show in London.
Us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beforehand, Blink went out to dinner at an Indian food restaurant that used to be right off of Piccadilly called Mint Leaf, where the whole band and crew went there. I think I misordered or something, but we got to the venue to play the show, and I just had to use the restaurant. Like, it was done. And it was in this fish marketplace, as you know, a converted fish market that is now they kind of use as like a mini convention center. And there was one bathroom for every single man in the whole place. And I went up and I found a stall and I just blew it out. It was the worst thing ever. And then I could hear the people running the show walking around saying, 5 minutes to air, 5 minutes to air. And Blink was the first band that was playing. So I had to get downstairs. I literally waited till everybody cleared the room, and then I opened the door, and standing right there was Robert Smith directly on the other side of the door that I had just blown out.
I'm sorry.
And then I went downstairs and played the song. And Robert Smith, as you know, all of the Cure is sitting there watching us play, and Robert Smith is going, That guy just ruined that bathroom.
Oh, man. You did beat me on this story, Mark. You were right. I will take having not heard Japanese whispers at that point in my life.
One last question before we let you go. What's your favorite vegan muffin?
Oh, I'm making it. So have you met Aaron Elliott? I'm sure he's cooked for you. Were you at the Beyond the Streets dinner that Roger?
No, I wasn't able to go.
So my dear friend, who I would take 1,000 bullets for, is a private vegan chef. And he lent me his recipe for his vegan muffins that he created. And they are gluten-free, sugar-free, chocolate chip, banana, almond flour muffins. And
wow.
Right now, I don't happen to have some made. I've learned to make these. I've been baking them for the majority of the quarantine. I since shifted to something far less delicious, but a bit more utilitarian in that my friend Aaron Nagel, who is a fine artist. Are you familiar with his paintings, Mark?
Nagel?
Not Patrick.
Okay. But I'm confusing two people.
Well, yes, of course, as many do. So Aaron Nagel, much younger, and thankfully still with us. He's a figurative artist. It almost borders on realism, but he paints.
Oh, these are awesome.
Yeah,
these are rad.
Yeah, aren't they? Yeah, I encourage everyone who's listening to explore both Patrick Nagel, who you probably already know because of Duran Duran, but Aaron Nagel, you may not know, and it's a very different genre and very, very moving. So he sent me this recipe for protein cookies that are made only of chickpeas and protein powder and peanut butter. Yeah. So if you're really deep into this world, they're a great placebo. I don't think they would be considered delicious by anybody other than maybe me and Aaron. Gus?
I just wanted to say that I remember the reason that question was brought up is I remember you in press years ago just talking about how you spend most of your free time looking for a good vegan muffin.
Yeah. Well, it's great, Gus, because those days are gone. Not that it's just the search is no longer necessary.
Yeah.
So what does the rest of your day hold?
This is what I've been doing with my evenings. I've been watching Fellini movies, and then I've been really enjoying this new experience that I've created for myself. There's a duo, I believe they're Los Hermanos Gutierrez.
Okay.
Who are these beautiful brothers who are half Swiss and half South American, who write instrumental, ambient, traditional Mexican music. All right.
Wow.
Cool. So you can imagine what this sounds like. My good friend Nils turned me onto this. He plays in Cold Cave. You know what that sounds like? The album cover of the latest record called Hijos del Sol is gorgeous. We got cactus in a twilight desertscape. So I've been listening to this. I really enjoy this. And then I had this epiphany. What if I were reading Cormac McCarthy while I was listening to this music?
Wow. Yeah.
I've been throwing that on and reading Cormac McCarthy. So I'll probably do that a little bit later. I might watch another Fellini film that I have yet to see. And I'll make myself probably my Uncle Whitey's pasta visual.
Sounds like a good night. Thank you very much, Davey. I appreciate your time. It's always awesome talking with you. Can't wait to hang out in person again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. I apologize for my prolixity. That's what I do.
Not at all. It's awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.